Hi, my name is Syiemlieh and welcome to Half in One. Today, let's talk about sweatshops. The first thing that comes to mind when people converse about sweatshops is the tyranny of capitalists over the poor, underpaid, and exploited workers. It brings to mind the image of women and children being made to slog in inhumane conditions while being vastly underpaid. According to the US General Accounting Office, it defines a sweatshop as an employer that violates more than one federal or state law governing minimum wage and overtime, child labor, industrial homework, occupational safety and health, workers' compensation, or industry regulation. Sweatshops can be a consequence of globalization, the vast and rapid rise of multinational corporations, the non-existent barriers to trade, the lack of strict migration policies, and the manufacturing process for developed or developing countries have all led to the increasingly low cost of labor for the multinational corporations. The main crux of the problem lies with the easily accessible foreign labor forces, which has ultimately enabled large industries to outsource their main production factories to third world countries. This method provides them with a much needed lower production cost and lower labor cost. The rise of sweatshops in developed countries such as America can be rooted to the rise of industrialization in the 19th century. It is during this period that millions of immigrants moved to this developing nation to make a better life for themselves and their families. They started to work in large factories where they were subject to long working hours and a fairly centralized hierarchical system of management. However, the factories were not the only places where one could find work. Women and children lacking the physical strength required for heavy factory work would ultimately move to the apparel business. The global marketplace is a constant power struggle among the major brands of who can undercut the other. The lower cost of labor may lead to lower market prices, but the quality of the product may be sacrificed. In recent times, people are more and more concerned about the quality of the product. This eventually leads to another power struggle among the exporters, as the ones that can provide lower costs and offer premium quality secure the orders for big multinational companies such as Nike, Gap, Apple, and other Western multinationals who outsource their production to emerging markets. Due to this competition, exporters cut costs to attain large profits. This is done in the form of inhumane working conditions and a measly wage. The rise of sweatshop culture leads to workers in garment factories, chip-making units, diamond polishing facilities, and factories of the global exporters to work in conditions that take away safety and benefits. This constant need to sacrifice working conditions for profits have led to a string of incidents such as the collapse of a building in a garment-making unit in Bangladesh, to outbreaks of violence in Apple product-making factories in China, to organized violence in automobile factories in India. According to the Center for International Policy Studies, over 60 million skilled and unskilled workers, the majority of whom are women and children, work in mass production textile factories or sweatshops in the export-oriented industries of developing nations. They work in exploitative conditions, while the owners of the factories in the developing nations and the multinationals of developed nations that buy the products make enormous profits. Advocacy groups demand that buyer countries stop importing clothes produced in such sweatshops by setting up trade barriers with the ultimate goal of shutting down the factories. However, although there is no doubt that the unethical treatment of the poor is wrong, Such ethical decisions cannot be taken without assessing the impacts of their closure on the vulnerable groups that we are supposedly trying to protect through these boycotts. Economically, the closure of sweatshops cuts off a major source of income for poor families in the short term and results in the lowering of a nation's GDP in the medium term. The ultimate impact is especially harsh on the vulnerable poor. Boycotting sweatshops, therefore, is not necessarily ethical, especially without making provisions for alternative sources of income for the poor. In economical standards, sweatshops are viewed as a voluntary agreement between two parties in which both the worker and the employer gain when they enter into a labor contract, regardless of how low the pay may seem to outside observers. From Walter Williams on the right to Paul Krugman on the left, economists across the political spectrum have defended sweatshops in the popular press. Despite an ethical understanding on child labor and trade sanctions on export-oriented industries such as sweatshops, child labor can be considered as a temporary solution to poverty. Most of the children working in these industries come from a very poor background. Families with no land, no financial support, and no way of making ends meet. Therefore, the children of the family are the only means of earning an income, especially where the father has abandoned the family and is headed by a single female. The debate on whether sweatshops should be closed is a difficult one. Most economists are divided on this topic, but they all agree on one thing: the atrocities related to child labor and the exploitation of factory workers should be eradicated. It is a major human rights issue, as these workers are not provided with a safe work environment nor a regulated salary. Therefore, regulating such issues will definitely provide a rather advantageous workspace.